Right on.
Hello, Harry.
How's it going, mate?
Not too bad. Just, uh,
Good.
just signing in for you.
Nice one. Yeah, cheers for joining yet again.
No bother, no bother.
Cool. Yeah, what have you been up to? Have you been playing any festivals this summer or not? Or you chilled out a bit?
Um, I think the last time we spoke, um, the others were recording their fourth album. So we recorded Look at You All Now, and that was released last year. And then this year, we've been just recording the fifth album. So we spent sort of February through to June doing the recording and doing the overdubs. And now we're just doing the mixing and the mastering. And then hopefully we'll put that out in a couple of months' time for free and give it away on Spotify or Bandcamp or YouTube, like we did the last couple of albums.
Yeah, fair play. Quite
Yeah.
prolific though. You're still like, on the boil quite a lot then in terms of songwriting.
Well, I think we are because we had a few years off. Um, I think when you have sort of 10 years between the third album and the fourth album, we had those years to sort of do our jobs and everything. And lots of writing material probably came from having 10-year break, really.
Yeah, fair play. And how many members are there these days?
Well, that's a very good question. We've moved up to seven, actually.
Okay.
Originally the band were a four-piece. Um, both myself, Jimmy Lager, Johnny Others, and Martin Oldham. Martin obviously had health problems with his heart, so he had to leave. And then since then, Joe Sid Gardner Lowe became our drummer. And then we've slowly added Eddie, who's now sort of our lead guitarist. We've added Steph, who's our keyboard player. And we've added another bass player, our third bass player, Steve McCready. So now we're seven of us. Yeah, so we're growing in numbers.
Yes, look forward to it. And when you say giving it away for free, have you just kind of just abandoned any idea of monetizing things? How
Um,
does it work?
well, what we did for the third album, which was Songs for the Disillusioned, we originally only gave that out on Bandcamp, and then we asked people to, pay what they want. I wouldn't say it covered the costs of the recording, but it helped a bit. So then we did the same for the fourth album, and then just asked all of the 853 Kamikaze Stage Diving Divisional members whether they would potentially like to part with some money or not. So yeah, again, people's given some money towards the recording costs, but certainly doesn't cover everything that we've done.
Yeah, fair play. And then where do you go to record these things? Is it all like I don't know, a
Um,
home thing, or do you have certain studios that you use?
well, the thing is about the others, geographically, we're quite spread out. So Eddie's over in Tartu, in Estonia. Jimmy and Johnny are down in Brighton and Hove. Then there's me and Steve in London. Joe is up in Sunderland. And then Steph is in Essex. So we're quite spread out. So what we tend to do is do um, rehearsals individually with the writers in terms of the musical parts. And maybe sort of I'll do some writing with Steve on his own, or with Johnny on his own, or with Jimmy on his own, or with Steph on his own. And then we all come together at a sort of central London location so that we can record. And then we do the same when it comes to doing any rehearsals. We do rehearsals individually and then all come together towards the end of the year, again at a central London location where we all rehearse together. So, yeah, we're a bit logistically challenged geographically.
suppose you got the tools to help with that though these days.
Well, yeah. Um, Computers wise, I'm not the most technical in the band, but we have a couple of guys that do uh, work in IT, so they're quite proficient.
Got an IT department.
Yeah, well, we've got a lawyer, uh, got an IT department. Next thing, we're just looking at the moment to sign for a record company, which will be the first time that we've actually been signed for a label since we were signed for the second album, which was Inward Parts, when we were signed to Lime Records back in 2006. So at the moment, we're just going through the contract at the moment, and fingers crossed we'll be able to then eventually put those albums out on vinyl.
All right, that's cool. So that a recent development type thing.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's like we made all of the albums, the third, the fourth, and the fifth ourselves. So from a record label's perspective, it's quite a good investment because they haven't got to pay for any recording costs. And so all they've got to do is pay for the vinyl and then split it with the band. So it's a pretty fair deal for the record companies, and it just sort of helps push it up the hill a bit more. So yeah, it's been good. We got approached a couple of times over the last few years, but the record deals didn't seem right. But this time it seems pretty fair. So we're just hopeful that we can put pen to paper soon as well.
No, yeah, that's interesting. I think I heard someone say that like they gave that as advice for young bands now is to like, yeah, do it yourselves and then garner the interest off the back of, a recording or a proper recording. But
Yeah, I mean we were very lucky for the first two albums because we had label interest after a couple of years.
yeah, yeah, different
Um,
times, I suppose.
yeah, but sort of these days we didn't have much interest since 2006, to be frank. So because of that, we just sort of took the DIY approach and paid for the albums ourselves whilst having a rather good 10 years off.
And what about just one more and we'll move on to the songs, but in terms of songwriting, has that process changed over the years or have it kind of have you got a certain
Yeah,
technique?
you're definitely right. Things have changed. So originally, I would always insist that we would always be together as a band to record or to rehearse. But as I explained earlier, with all of the band members being spread out across the country in Europe, now we've just decided that we write individually. So I tend to sort of start the writing for the last few albums with Steve, and then I move on to Jimmy, and then I move on to Johnny, and then I move on to Steph and Eddie. Depending when Eddie can fly in, we sound very international. And then tend to write sort of 5, 6 songs with each of those members, and then we'll pull the songs together sort of as a big rehearsal before we record and sort of do a cull in terms of which ones get on the album or not. So for the fourth album, we ended up having for the fifth album, we ended up having 30 songs to choose from, which was a good position to be in. And then we had to obviously cull that down to say 15, something like that, which would be for the fifth. But yeah, it's just always sad when you've recorded them and you've got to make decisions where they've got to go. So maybe there'll be some leftover for the sixth album.
Yeah, yeah. But like say a song like I don't know, like a song like William, does that start with you at home with a guitar? Or is it always been like a joint
No,
effort?
no, I've always insisted on not writing any music. So I've always just let the boys write their own music, and then I'll write my lyrics on top of it once I've heard their riff, so to speak. But I just wrote the music and the words for a song on the fifth album. So it's taken me 5 albums, but yeah, I've just started sort of writing both the music and the words together. But generally, I let the lads write the music, and then I'll find some lyrics that will go on top. And I prefer it that way because I think that the musicians should have the right to choose the music, because I'm not a musician. I'm just a singer and a front person, you know.
Ah, yeah, fair play. It's interesting stuff. Right, mate. Well, I've asked you to compile your favourite songs
Ah,
of
yes.
the 2000s, 10 of them, in fact. And we'll start with a band I believe you called your favourite band of all time, The Fall. Is that right?
Very much so. I do like Marky Smith, and was very, very, very fortunate to see the Fall quite a few times. So when I first came to London, which was for university in 1996, I got to see the Fall at uni when they were playing at Main Fiddler. So Main Fiddler doesn't exist anymore, but it used to be next to the old Astoria, which also doesn't exist anymore. And when I turned up there was like 500-600 people to see the Fall, and I was only like 19, and literally there was older blokes there just laughing at me because they couldn't believe I was so young watching the Fall. I'd been 18, 19, and the average age of the Fall audience were, in their 40s and 50s at that stage. So yeah, it was quite a baptism of fire to watch the Fall when I was young, and then got to see them quite a bit in London. I did some good gigs at the Irish Centre, um, which was really good. And I saw them at Coco, saw them at Islington Academy, saw them at Hackney Empire. So I got to see Marky Smith quite a few times. But a lot of the time when you went to see the Fall, what would happen is you would only get to hear the new album. So if you didn't have the new album, you might not necessarily know the songs, but he was belligerent about it. So you'd be there thinking, come on, just play like 2, 3 songs that I know from the past, kind of thing. And if you were lucky, you might get 2 songs in a set of say 20 that you knew. And then everything else would be new songs. So yeah, it was always having to go in to watch the Fall, not knowing any of the songs, but he was still brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. Was he someone you ever met in person?
No, I never got to meet Marky Smith personally, but I don't know if he would have liked me or not. But I know that he knew of me, so that was reassuring. So I'm a Manchester City fan, as you may know, for my sins, and supported them when we were a lot worse than we are now. And my esteemed roadie, who you may know, Jeff Catani,
Yeah, he's been on a couple of times, yeah.
as did one gig for the Fall, and ended up speaking to Marky Smith about me and having a chat, and they shared some things in the dressing room together. And I do know they discussed my name and my band, but I don't know what feedback he gave.
Well, fair play. Let's play the song then. This is Green Eyed Loco Man by The Fall. Then the next band, yeah, I remember you mentioning this band in your episode, and then they've cropped up quite a few times since on the podcast, The Parkinsons. Yeah, what are your memories and why this song?
Yeah, so obviously another good song from the 2000s. This one I've got down as 2003, same year as Green Eyed Loco Man by The Fall. The Parkinsons are an absolute catalyst in a revolution for me personally. When I came to London originally in the 90s, I would go and watch bands play, and I would often go and watch those bands play on my own. And there wasn't much camaraderie, solidarity, or community. And I'd go and watch the concert, and I'd leave the concert on my own. And I thought, we're missing a trick here. Really are missing a trick. All these people together, they're like the same band. Surely they could all hang out together. And so I obviously developed that with the others, with the 853 Kamikaze Stage Diving Division, making sure that everybody had access to each other. But the Parkinsons were the first band I'd ever seen who actually did it first. We definitely put in a good shift looking after our fan base over the years. But being sort of early 20s, watching the Parkinsons play, and then afterwards the Parkinsons would all walk out into the audience and talk to the crowd, and then everybody would hang out with the band. The dressing rooms for Parkinson's gigs were open to anyone within reasons up until like the last 10 minutes, where they would have like a band thing just privately. But generally, everyone was going up and down the stairs into their dressing rooms. And then after the concert would be finished, and that people would go to house parties, and you'd hang out with Victor, and you'd hang out with Pedro, and you'd hang out with Alfonso, and you'd hang out with Chris, the drummer, and they were just very personable and very easy to get on. And I was going up to the Dirty Water Club a lot, which was in Tufnell Park, and I was going up to see the DJ PJ. And PJ is like just an amazing garage DJ, and he would put the Parkinsons on regularly at the Dirty Water Club. And that's sort of it was just the sort of step before the others obviously were starting to get started. And obviously, because of the Parkinsons, as I touched upon in previous episodes, they were the first band to obviously give us a support slot and to help us out, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah, it does feel like something that differentiated that naughty scene a bit in terms of like the fans and the bands being quite close. Would you agree
Yeah.
with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I managed to do, certainly with the 853 Kamikaze stage diving division, is that I wanted to, break down any boundaries that there was between fan and band. I didn't like the idea that the concert would sort of end at 11, and then a lot of the time people might be marooned in Shrewsbury or Mansfield or Colchester or Wigan, wherever you were. So I kind of realized from the first tour, and also from the London gigs, a lot of people in London who were coming to watch us on a Wednesday night or a Tuesday night didn't have means to get home a lot of the time. So after parties were necessary so that those people would have somewhere to stay. Likewise, it was the same when you were touring across the UK for the first time. Lots of people were traveling to see you. A lot of the time at the concerts, they would get intoxicated if they'd driven there. So they would need somewhere to stay. And so, again, when we were on tours, we did a lot of hotel parties to make sure that people had places to stay, and then they drive home in the morning. So I think the community spirit also having, we were the first generation online as well, really, that we could use forums like the libertines.org plus Let's Kill the Others, which was our own website, and then MySpace, which moved into Facebook. All of those things were tools that maybe the generation before us didn't have to build their community. And we certainly utilized those tools. And obviously, I got the NME Award for innovation. So, I think in terms of community spirit, our generation, for those noughties, we really utilized the tools, and we were kind of like the guinea pigs for those forums, linking everybody together. It was a really good tool to use to, promote your gigs.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's something that's quite special about that period as well, where before it became, it was just like those forums rather than everything which we have now, which is
Yeah.
like, I don't know, something a bit more special about that, I guess.
The forums sort of helped a lot. So if you looked at originally with libertines.org, Peter would post on there regularly, but he would also allow the bands to post on there. So I was posting on there, and then you would have the Paddingtons would put a post for their gig, and the Cribs would put a post for their gigs, and the Rakes would put a post for their gigs. And because it was all happening on one forum, it was a centralized space that people could go to. And then each of the individual bands, we had our own forums, and then we did the same for the bands that supported us. So the Rakes were supporting us, and they would put their gigs on our forums, and the Cribs supported us, and Paddingtons did. So it all kind of went round those forums. But then I think when it sort of moved to Facebook, I think then it just became very individualized in terms of the band itself.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's all a bit a cookie cutter kind of thing now, as well, isn't it? It's a bit more individualism on the forums, I think,
Well,
in a way.
I think now Facebook, you just search for the band, don't you? And you only see
Mm.
that band. Whereas in the past, you were going to sort of a central place, maybe where lots of different bands were posting at the same time. So that linked everything, those forums. So it was a good site. And this Parkinsons song, if you get a chance to hear it, it's a bit long, but it's from their "Long Way to Nowhere" album, and I advise anyone if they've got at any time, it's quite a short album, to go out and get "Long Way to Nowhere." And there's also a documentary about the Parkinsons called "Long Way to Nowhere" as well, and I feature in it, and I've got an interview in it as well.
Excellent. Great link back. Well, here's the Parkinsons with Scientists. Then the next band definitely had the name quite a lot, a Cara Cult.
Wow, God. Paul Resonate, he was excellent frontman. So, wow, I saw a Cara Cult probably as much as I saw the Parkinsons, and they're just like absolutely faster than any other band around. If you go onto YouTube and put the Cara Cult concerts and have a look at some of their early concerts, the speed of their drummer, my God, he's probably the fastest drummer I've ever seen. He is just so tight, and as a band, as a unit, they're just really on it. The song One Note, from their album Chatham Business. I used to play Chatham Business just back to back, and they were all very short songs, like 3 4 minute songs. The album flows very quickly, and I watched them a lot of times. They did some gigs for NME at the time, which was a big tour. So a Cara Cult played alongside the Parkinsons and played alongside 80s Beeline Matchbox Disaster, and did like a rock and roll riot tour. That was sort of back in 2001 or two. And then I would see a Cara Cult all the time in London. Got to meet Paul in later years, and I was just like gobsmacked, really. I got a chance to actually meet Paul from a Cara Cult. And I also got to meet, I think her name's Claire, who's the guitarist as well, and spent some time with her. And then also saw them when they had gigs with Yeah Yeah Yeahs as well back in the early days. But just as a band, they only did 2 albums, and said that after 5 years that they would not play again. So they had like a mantra that it was only going to be 5 years that they did, and then they wouldn't play again. Which is a shame, really, because there's so many people who would probably like to see them and pay good money to go and watch them again. And if you get a chance to listen to Chatham Business, it's a wonderful album.
Okay, great. Well, here they are. Here's a Cara Cult with One Note. And then the next band, the Soft Pack. Not heard of these
Oh,
guys before.
wow.
What can you tell us?
Soft Pack. So, God, poor old Soft Pack. Um, really overlooked. Okay, so the Parkinsons got page lines in NME at the time. A Cara Cult got good reviews in NME. But the Soft Pack original band name, they were called the Muslims, and some cultural appropriation was attached to the fact that white Caucasian kids were using the name the Muslims as a band. And so people sort of didn't take to them initially, to their choice of band name. So they changed the band name to the Soft Pack, and this song Extinction came as their first EP before they did their first album. They're a really, really great band from the States. I managed to get to see them once before they broke up. They were on their second album tour in the sort of 2010 period. And I got to see them play in Shoreditch just the once. And I was the only person dancing in the whole crowd, and I got told off for dancing. Um,
Who by other
well,
people?
when you're sort of at the front at a concert, and you sort of jump up and down. I'm sure you've done it in your time, um, but maybe I don't think I was allowed to sort of jump up and down at the venue because most of the venue, everyone was just stood there just watching. No one moving at all. So I was told off for jumping up and down. But the soft pack are really good, very underrated. Obviously, shame about their original name. And then they sort of split up, I think, after their second album. But yeah, not enough was said about them at the time, and we used to listen to them a lot.
Okay, well, here they are. Here's the Softback with Extinction. Then the next band, definitely heard the name before, the Dirt Bombs, another American band, I think.
Yes. Okay. So the Dirt Bombs, I was introduced to at the Dirty Water Club by PJ. So PJ, who was the resident DJ at Dirty Water Club, would play Dirt Bombs quite a lot. Um, and when you hear the Dirt Bombs at first, you'd probably think that they were an original garage band, from the 60s, the way they sound. And at first, when I was listening to them, I didn't realize, because I'd only heard them at Dirty Water Club, that they were a new band, effectively. So I found out that they were playing a couple of times in London, got to see the Dirt Bonds play in both different lineups with their change of guitarist. And they're just a really solid garage band, really tight, and just they sound like timeless, really. Certainly, I think what I got down here, that this is 2001. It certainly doesn't sound like it's from 2001. But yeah, if you like garage music, you'll love the Dirt Bombs.
Okay, great. Well, here they are. Here's the Dirt Bombs with Underdog. Then the next band, Stephen Markmus, big Hull City fan. Stephen Markmus and the Jicks.
He is.
Um, with Crossong. Is this one you've been into in terms of all his work, kind of thing?
Yeah. So, when you sort of said about the 2000 period, obviously by then, unfortunately, Pavement were over. Um, and I had every single album of Pavement, and the B-sides album, sort of Westing with Musket and Sextant. And that was the mainstay of my sort of 13, 14, 15-year-old days, listening to Pavement, Slanted and Enchanted, and Westing with Musket and Sextant on repeat. And then got to see Pavement, I think, at Glastonbury originally, and then got to see them in later years when they reformed. When some friends got us some tickets to see them play at Brixton, when they played at Brixton, and also saw them at the Roundhouse, and they were excellent. But this period, in the noughties, he was in the Jicks, and he'd done his first solo album, which I really liked. And then this sort of came out, I think 2003. I think I did write it down. Yeah, 2003. So this is just as the others were starting to make headway. And it's a really lovely album, this Jix album. It's called Pig Lib. If anyone wants to go out and get the album, so it's Pig Lib. And this is probably my favorite song on the album, and just deals with some sort of topical subject matter in a really sweet way. So I think he writes really well, and it was a good period really for the Jicks. I really like them. I got to see them a couple of times, but I obviously Pavement is my bread and butter really.
Yeah, fair play. Well, here it is anyway. Here's Stephen Markmus and the Jicks with Crossong. And then another band I'm not heard of, to be fair, Spiral Stairs.
Oh, Spiral Stairs. So what happens is Pavement split up. Stephen Martmus goes off and does his stuff. And then Spiral Stairs, he does his own album and he leaves Pavement as well when they split up. Now this album, the album's quite a chilled out album. But this single, Stolen Pills, is like really high octane. And the pace of it and the drums are in it are really, really fast. It's really catchy song. And with when Pavement had come back and they did the anniversary gigs and played at Brixton Academy, both myself and Mr. Steve McCready, the bass player from the others, we managed to buy tickets for Pavement, but also to buy tickets to watch Spiral Stairs straight afterwards at the Windmill. So we've finished watching Pavement play at 11. Then we had to run up Brixton Hill all the way from Brixton Academy. And then we got to the venue about 20 past 11. And then he set up and he was ready to play at like 11:30. So he'd just done a 2.5 hour gig with Pavement. And then someone had taken him up to the Brixton Windmill and he went on and played another hour and a half with his band. And I thought, wow, that really is respect. 2 gigs back to back, 2 different bands, totally loads of different songs in your new band, plus all of the Pavement back catalogue, and to do them in such quick frequency with, only half an hour between gigs. I thought that was, top dollar. That was really good. His band were really tight. And obviously, Brixton Windmill was far too small a venue for Spiral Stairs, but I think it was the closest venue in proximity to Brixton Academy. So obviously we were very lucky to watch them play, but yeah, it was rammed in there. It was absolutely rammed. But yeah, if you get a chance, this Spiral Stairs song, Stolen Pills, is really worth a listen.
Okay, great. Well, here it is. His Spiral Stairs with Stolen Pills. Yeah, the Windmill. I've heard a few bands talk about that, particularly the Rakes. Was that a bit of a key
Um,
venue in the noughties, or not really?
Not so much in the noughties. When the others came back for the third album, which was in 2013, we did 2 gigs at the Windmill, and they obviously we sold both out, and they were like riotous. But it was, and then after those gigs, it wasn't too long afterwards that we sort of took a break from 2015 to about 2020. We just did nothing for 5 years, but it was through the 2010 period. Where you had bands like Fat White Family playing at the Windmill regularly. They have been instrumental, I think, in terms of the Southeast London scene and the Windmill. And it would be sort of really all of their crew and their fans that have made that venue what it is. But back in the noughties, not so much, not so much.
Fair play. I keep meaning to listen to Fat White Family. It's one I never got into, but a few people recommended them.
Yeah, first album's lovely. It's really nice. Well worth a listen if you get a chance. Um, yeah, it's very confrontational music.
Fair play. Sounds good. And then we move on to one of your songs, Dom, from the
Yes.
second album, I believe. Why this particular one?
Right. Well, I see next year we're doing the 20th anniversary of the first album played in its entirety.
Yes.
Um, and it's always a bit scary having to learn your back catalogue again. And I would say there's probably 6 songs on that album I haven't sung for 15 years. Um, so it's quite an ordeal for the memory to take it on board again to try and learn all those lyrics. The song Darren Daniel David I haven't sung live since 2004, and I've only ever sung it twice live. So I'm having to sort of relearn the first album. So I couldn't give you any songs from the first album because I'm having to, at the moment, it's like work. You're having to listen to your first album again to try and learn the lyrics. So I thought, right, I'll give you something from the second album, which I'm not having to learn at the moment.
That
so
makes sense.
it doesn't seem like work when I'm listening to it. So yeah, this is from the second album, Inward Parts, which came out in 2006, and that was released on Lime Records. And Desolate was one of the songs on that album, and it's got a really nice bass line that was written by Johnny. Yeah, if you get a chance, not always heard Desolate, but it's a good little song by the others.
Excellent. And yeah, I did want to ask, like, those first two albums came out in back-to-back years. Was
Yeah.
that a deliberate decision? Let's get it out quite quickly.
So I looked at it as really just getting the deals in terms of the record deals itself. You got to remember, we started the band in 2002, and it took me until 2004 to get us signed. And we were playing constantly, at least on a bad month, twice a month, on a good month, as much as 4 times a month. And it was pretty solid all the time, apart from sort of summer times. But we were, whether it was September through till about May, we were pretty much working our guts out for 2 years to get us signed. And then I was having to go to quite a lot of record company parties to try and get people to pick up the CD and listen to it and things like that. Um, the original album that we got signed for Universal was obviously for about 4 or 5 options. So you have, like, when you have a 4 or 5 album deal, it's really only options, okay? Because if they don't pick up the second option, it's not a 4 or 5 record deal, is it?
Yeah, yeah.
So you get 4 or 5 options. After the first album sold 60 odd thousand, we were 40,000 short. So I knew the second option wasn't going to be picked up by Universal.
Did you know that was the target, the 100,000?
Yes,
Okay,
it
right.
had to go gold. It had to go
Right, right.
gold. You sign him for a major, it
Do
has
you think
to
that was
go
the same
gold.
with like the Parkinsons then? Because they had a similar deal, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, they would have had a target too, and if they didn't hit the target, that's why they got dropped.
Right, right.
When you sign to a major, they just give you a target, and if you don't hit it, it's that ruthless. Sixty
Yeah.
thousand in today's terms is brilliant.
Yeah, yeah.
It's excellent sales, but for a major, it's still not good enough for them. So we were 40,000 short. So I could have stayed on board and written some music more and hoped that they were going to pick up one of the options. But as far as I was concerned, I didn't hit my target. So we got our lawyer to release us from the record contract because we knew that Lime Records wanted to sign us, and it was a way of getting another album out. Now, if I'd not waited, I might not have got that second album out. So I had to gamble. I had to think, well, are Universal going to pick us up with 40,000 short on the target, or do I get my lawyer to release us from the record deal, which gets us over to Lime Records, gets us to record the second album quickly, and hopefully a chance of a third one afterwards. So it was just trying to think, well, if you've got a record label who wants to sign you, you've got to do it, haven't you?
No, yeah. Can't imagine many bands are that pragmatic, so fair play. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think you've got to strike where the iron's hot, hasn't it? If I might not have had that option again, and I certainly haven't since. So it was a good bit of business at the time, really, to get 2 albums out in 2 years. Then we've had no interest really, and since only the last few years we've started having interest from record companies again, and most of the offers have been um, hard to negotiate. Yeah, so it's not till this one that we've got papers out for and are reading it that we actually had any real interest. So you think that's from like 2006 up until 2024. It's a big gap.
Yeah, fair play. It's interesting like how is a record company going to make money then? You mentioned vinyl. Is that the kind of the way forward?
Yeah, yeah. So I think you touched upon it. Obviously, there is a bit of a renaissance in terms of certain bands doing tape cassettes as well.
Oh, yeah.
And some CDs of sort of more popular bands are sold in Tesco's and stuff like that. But generally, as you've touched upon, the resurgence really is in vinyl. Um, the demand's high enough that there's queues for the limited vinyl factories that we have that press them. So that's a good uh, position to be in if there's that much demand for vinyl that there's queues for the vinyl pressings, and that's why a lot of vinyl releases are delayed because it's just the demand is high but the production is low. So that's a good thing in terms of them making money. Well, you would look at it quite simply is that they're going to pay the manufacturing costs of the cost to put it on the vinyl, and then whatever profit that they make after their costs will be divided between us and the band. So it's, if you're doing 500 copy runs, you're doing 1,000 copy runs, you can work out roughly what that's going to be priced up on in terms of money, times that by 1,000 an album. You've got a rough idea. And then we divide it by 7.
Yeah. Is that for the full back catalogue then they'll be doing that?
Yeah,
Or
so the idea at the moment is to just put out the 5th album on vinyl and see how that goes.
right.
Then there might be options where we kind of work backwards, put the 4th album on vinyl, put the 3rd album on vinyl as well. So it'd be nice to get those out because obviously the first album, the debut self-titled album, went out on CD, went out on vinyl in terms of physical copy, and then that went into the territories of the UK and Ireland, Europe and Japan, and then the second album just went to UK and Ireland and Europe. And then since then, the albums that we've had have just been purely digital.
Yeah. And am I right in thinking like when's the last time you did a proper tour? You mean like
Um,
singular gigs really?
Last tour, I think, was 2013 or 2014. So that would have been to coincide with the release of songs for the Disillusioned. We've been offered a few gigs over the last few years, obviously since we recorded the 4th album and that. But we have to sort of price it up in terms of economics of what the fee is outside of London, then the cost of us hiring a splitter van, a roadie because none of us drive, a cost of accommodation if we can afford that, or where we stay. And when you kind of work it out, it's just not been there enough economically to make it viable. So we've just been doing London gigs, like one gig a year or once every couple of years. And that's all we can really do for now. We hope to do another gig next year, obviously for the 20th anniversary of the first album, and then maybe a gig in 2026, which would be 20 years of the second album. So we've got a couple of anniversary gigs to do first.
Yeah. I think a few bands are could be a busy time for reunions, I think.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years, it's a nice thing to mark. And it just means once we've done these 2 anniversary gigs next year and in 2026 for the 2 albums, means we've got no more anniversary gigs for another 10 years then. And that'll be the 30th.
Yeah. Okay, well let's move on to your last two songs then.
Yeah.
White Denim I've definitely heard of. Good band.
Oh,
Why
yes.
this particular song?
Wow. Um, so obviously you might know White Denim these days, and they sound a bit more like Led Zeppelin. Um, and that's nothing against Led Zeppelin, and that's nothing against the sound that they sound like at the moment. They're very progressed album by album, and they changed the sound a lot. But this was the album I knew the most when they sort of first came out. And again, it's just very high octane, very fast, just a lot of passion, really well played instruments, to the extent that live around that period, they were wild. They were really great to watch. And I got to see them a couple of times in small venues. When I've got to see them as they've matured and got older, they've obviously changed their style a bit. So they're not the same band as they were, but they've evolved into obviously a different beast over time, like many bands do. But this song, if you ever see the video, it's hilarious. It's called "Let's Talk About It," and it's a great little video as well.
Okay, great. Well, here's White Denim with "Let's Talk About It." And your last song, definitely the most experimental choice, Beak.
Yes. Yeah, well, I thought it's best to end the 10 songs from the 2000s with something maybe a bit more left field. So when I was younger, in the 90s, just before I came to London, trip hop had really exploded in the southwest of the country. And as you may know, I'm from the farmlands, and I'm from Somerset, from a tiny little hamlet of red brick houses in a tiny village called Heybridge near a tiny city called Wells. So there was never really much when you were growing up to represent the area. And I've touched upon this before. The Blue Aeroplanes from Bristol were a band around, and you knew of the Wurzels, and you knew of the Trogs from the 60s.
Who
Um,
was the nearest football team to that?
Yeovil Town and Bristol City and
Okay.
Bristol Rovers. So my father would support Bristol City, and my mum's boyfriend supported Manchester City. So I sort of became a Manchester City fan when I was growing up, but I would go and watch Bristol City play as well. But yeah, there wasn't many sort of bands to look up to really. Reef were the sort of last Somerset band, but they were public school boys that went to Millfield, and no disrespect to them or anything, but most of the kids didn't in Somerset don't go to public school boys. They're to public schools. They're kids that are shipped into Somerset from other towns and cities where these kids are boarders, aren't they? They're boarders. They're not comprehensive kids like us. So even though Reef were technically from Somerset, I think they register us from Millfield School, which is a boarding school. So they were the sort of last band I had to sort of look up to really in that period. And then trip hop sort of exploded at the same time in Bristol. So we would travel up to Bristol, Massive Attack, Portishead, and Tricky. And they played like Ashton Court Festival and got to see them there. And then I got to see Portishead a few times and Tricky a few times, playing at Glastonbury Festival. And then just in sort of the late years of the noughties, this song, so Backwell's quite close to where I grew up. It's about 12 miles from my house. And there's lots of these tiny little villages that have maybe 1,000 people, these tiny little villages in the middle of nowhere. And he named the song Backwell. And there's not really much going on in Backwell by all accounts. It's a tiny little town, but it was the first sort of thing that he'd done, as far as I was aware, after Portishead had split up, and obviously he went and formed Beak. And then when I heard Backwell, it was just like, wow, this is really haunting stuff, and it gives another kind of side to Somerset. All of the North Somerset little villages. So if you ever do get to Somerset on your way, maybe to Glastonbury one time, do sort of visit Backwell and visit Haybridge and visit Wells, and you'll get a feel for it.
Okay, nice one. Well, here it is. Here's Beak with Backwell.